The following is a presentation of Surprise Church. El siguiente programa es la presentación de la iglesia Surprise.
I need to do and what I want to do, and here they are still basking in the glow of what happened yesterday. It was so cool. And I think God wants us to get better at enjoying something like Sunday worship. I think He wants us to get better at enjoying something like this corporate environment that can be so refilling and charging into our faith, and to be able to carry some things with us beyond the moment. I think that's so important. But I often used to sit down with middle school students. And my last church, I worked with hundreds of middle school students. That was my job. And I would interview them as they're ready to kind of share their faith publicly through confirmation, as we called it. And one of the things I would have them do, especially the guys, because junior high boys have a vocabulary that is monosyllabic. I mean, they don't have a lot to say. And I know this from having my own son. I get home from school. How was school today? Just not interested in conversing. Like my daughters are all about filling me in on paragraphs and paragraphs. And my son is just, okay. We'll grunt back and forth, and then we'll call it a day. So the guys in particular, girls too, but guys in particular, I'd say, draw me a picture of your faith story. Because if you're going to give me words, like the girls would diagram it and label it and add paragraphs beneath. So I was going to get the words from the girls usually, but it at least got the guys to do something. And I tell you, I kid you not, more often than not, I would get a picture that looked like a mountain range of their life. Sometimes no words at all. Sometimes there was one word. Bible camp. Mission trip. Christian conference. Spiritual concert. Religious thing. And on the bottom was grandma died. This happened, bad thing happened, that bad thing happened, parents got a divorce. Their life was a sort of up and down event-based faith that eventually petered out as life happened and the lows happened. And I started to wonder, are we doing ourselves a disservice doing some of these events? Like, should we not do these events? Because if I could take the kids' faith story and make it a little bit more like this and maybe just a gradual incline, wouldn't that be better than I took them to an event and then it went away, and then we took them to an event and then it went away? Especially since 80% of kids who go through some sort of Christian education instruction model in middle school never go back to church. They do this for a while programs are structured for them, and then they're gone. Churches are struggling with this event-based faith that's tied to something that someone plans and does for them, and then they go back into the world, and it's like, even if you're really, really good, like my grandparents, really, really good, and just holding and smoldering it for a couple days, eventually it's gone. And so as we talk about spiritual growth, we are challenging ourselves to claim this truth that oftentimes gets missed when we think about our own personal individual faith. Faith is a public, corporate thing. It's time to just wipe away the whole idea of faith as something that just happens kind of sort of privately. Christianity is a relationship with Jesus in His family, the church. You read the Bible, it is impossible to sort out the Bible if you're only reading it to figure out how I individually live, because it's all about how we live together. You can do your best to say, well, I think that means this is what I should do individually, but if you don't have a together type of environment to actualize those principles with, you're going to find yourself really struggling. It's like if you're trying to be like on a bobsled team and you don't have a team. It's like how do you, if you want to drive a sailboat and you don't have anybody else, that sail's going to come around and whack you in the head because someone's not doing the thing with the string. And you can tell I'm really schooled with sailboat craft. You can tell. I've been around a lot. So today we're going to talk a little bit about that, the fact that hope leaks between events. We get together, we hope, and we're singing these songs, and I'm like, man, the way that we have some amazing musicians, don't we? I mean, our musicians just rock. I mean, they're good-looking people, but they sound good. And I'm sitting there like, this is awesome, and like there's this hope swell that happens as all our voices join together. And then you can leave, and you find this thing that happens as life happens, that there's this leak effect, you know? Like right now, I'm getting this notification in our vehicle that tire needs air, and it annoys me because it's telling me, you got to fill me up. There's a hole, or it's just plain cold out, and I need more air. And in some ways, it would be nice for us to have alarms in our own faith, and I think God gives us alarms in different ways. But after public worship, there is a sense of this is an event, and when we leave, there's a leakage that just naturally happens, even if you're really good at smoldering with gratitude for something that you hear or celebrate. And so we've talked, throughout this series about, okay, what are those steps that we want to gently and helpfully guide people to beyond worship to make sure that when our hope leaks, we have a plan to how to reinstitute that hope. We have a plan for refilling hope. So today we're going to emphasize the second step after worship that we want to help people identify, if they haven't yet, is what does it look like to be engaged in community outside of worship? What are some of the options for that? What does it look like? And most importantly, I want to frame it from a biblical perspective to kind of carry out this why. So I'm going to bring us to Hebrews chapter 10. And Hebrews 10 has something to say, I think, about what we do outside of church. I think you could read this from a perspective of just Sunday morning and misunderstand it. This passage is about what we do outside of Sunday morning, okay? So look at verse 23, how it starts out this paragraph. Let us hold unswervingly to the hope we profess, for he who promised is faithful. I mean, look at what's assumed in that passage right there. Number one, it says that hope is something that we have in God, and God is not going to be like wishy-washy. He does not go from event to event and peter out. We do. It's assuming that God is faithful, that God gives us hope, but if we don't hold on to it, it's like studying for a test 2 weeks early and you don't plan to look at that content until the test day, you're in trouble. Sometimes when I write my sermons, I write them during the week because we have to get bulletins printed and all that stuff like that. And if I don't look at them again before I get up on Sunday morning, I'm like, whoa, I guess I was going to say something about that slide. How's that going to look today? So I have to look at it again because it kind of leaks out of the old head, you know. And so faith is a lot like that. How do we plug that hope leak? What does it look like? Because we have a hope in an unshakable God who never empties out himself, but we do. What do we do? So what's going to come after this verse is, how do you plug that leak? And what do you do when you start to feel like your faith is leak? Or if you don't want that to happen, what do you do in advance? Before I do that, though, I want to clarify. Here's what I mean by losing your hope. I think sometimes you think of hope walking around just grumpy and depressed. I think when we see hopeless people, especially people who believe in Jesus that have lost their hope, it looks more like what's on the slide here. You have confused your identity with your achievement. You have heard about this message of a God who says, you know what? I recognize a brokenness in your life. You could never hope to earn or achieve my love, and I want to give it to you free of charge. I'm going to die on the cross, set you free from the need to achieve in order to win love and affection for yourself. And I'm going to send you back into the world with that status of my beloved child, to be able to share love rather than try to earn favor. I'm going to send you out into the world with that freedom. And we go into the world, after we go to church, we hear that hope, we're filled up with that hope, and we walk out there, and then we lose it. Because we see this ladder to climb, and that hurdle to jump, and that achievement to gain, and that self-image thing to try to live up to, and we throw away the hope we have in this free, undeserved love of God, and we start playing that game again. Losing your biblical hope is not just becoming sad. It is trading away the free grace that we have in God and trying again to play the rat race of life. That's what losing your hope is. And so when we do that, we start living for appearances again, don't we? And it's exhausting. How many people do I have to please if I really decide that I'm going to try to please people? It's exhausting. I have played that game. I'm good at that game, but I'm not good enough at that game. You try to please all the different voices in the audience of your life, it's just impossible. And when you do that, you become very, very busy trying to live up to all the expectations that are all around you. So when God is no longer your source of acceptance and joy, you have to turn to everyone else and try to please as many people as you possibly can. And you become incredibly self-important, self-obsessed, and busy. Your agenda is more important than just about anything else in the world. And that makes you very stressed about the future. It makes you extremely procrastinating toward your relationships and your self-care. It oftentimes prevents you from taking a look at people and seeing people that Jesus loved enough to die for and trying to think about, how can I plug a hope leak in that person? How can I just have margin in my day and my life in order to really care and actually feel the needs of other people? If you're too busy trying to please people, you don't feel a certain sense of compassion that Jesus felt when he walked around. It says that when Jesus walked around, he looked around and he just saw people differently. It says that oftentimes it says his bowels moved, which means something different in this day and age than it did back then. It means that he was moved with compassion in his guts. He said, I just see people and I see sheep without a shepherd. And it led him to act out of that compassion. Can you imagine if Jesus was just frantically trying to please everybody? He would have totally missed that. And too often I see, when I hear how Jesus looked around and saw people, and then I look at my life and I'm like, I'm the exact opposite of Jesus. I'm an anti-Jesus. And I want to be more like you, Jesus. So we don't necessarily take an interest in lost people, and we have no bandwidth. We just don't have bandwidth for living on the mission that God put us on earth. And that's I think in a sense, that's the definition of what sin is. Like if you're living in the year 2019, you're like, hasn't sin kind of worn out its use? I mean, we're past the point of medieval, times where sin was this bizarre thing that we threw around like magic and witchcraft. And I'm like, I think sin is more clear today than ever. That I can craft my own mission for my own life that has nothing to do with God is proof to me that sin is abundantly real. That I can go through my days thinking about pleasing people rather than pleasing God, thinking about my own mission rather than God's mission, is proof to me that we live in a creation that is rebelling against God, and that's just real. We all feel it and sense it. This is what it looks like to lose your hope in God. Sometimes we think, well, I have to think this way because I want to get ahead. This is not the pathway to a happy life. This is the pathway to hopelessness and misery, because there's no winning this rat race. Even if you come out on top this year, you got to start over next year. Even if you come out on top today, you got to start over tomorrow. And then there's that whole what's going to be left over thing. Here's a question that should really haunt every human being. Who am I when everything that I can do, manage, or accomplish is gone? Who am I going to be when I retire? What if I became disabled? What if I had a brain injury and I could no longer speak? What if I lost a certain loved one? And what if my life was totally pivoted by a tragedy or a trial? Who would I be? See, the rat race is great when everything's going great, but who are you when you lose? When it's gone? Will you have hope at that point? See, that's the kind of thing that the gospel is exactly meant for. God doesn't want our hope and our joy resting on things that will always be fragile. He wants us having a firmness in our ability to be able to look at the future and say, I have hope. I believe that my best days are in front of me. No matter how old I am or how sick I am, I believe that my best days are in front of me, and I believe it's coming to pass. And so Hebrews continues. I'm going to go after that first sentence, which you see in gray on the screen there. Let's hold unswervingly to the hope we profess, for he who promises faithful. Listen to how it says to hold on to your hope. Let us consider how we may spur one another on toward love and good deeds. I highlighted all the one another parts of this passage. This is evidently the key to hope, has something to do with these horizontal relationships that we have in faith. Not giving up meeting together, as some are in the habit of doing, but encouraging one another, as all the more you see the day approaching. Again, I don't think this is referring just to Sunday morning. I think it's important I think Sunday morning is included here, but I really believe that this is referring to other environments outside of Sunday morning where you're not just silently looking forward at the back of someone's head, but you're actually able to do what it says to do, to encourage one another, to spur one another on, to live from your identity in Jesus. So one anothering is kind of a verb that I'm using to title the sermon today, is routinely meeting to spur one another toward love and encourage one another to live from our identity in Jesus. If we don't have people in our lives that say, hey, is that good? In that thing that you're about right now, is that good? Is it coming from love or some other motive? Is that God? Is it good? Is it love? Is it God? If we don't have people one anothering us in that way, we're going to lose our hope. Because we're going to start basing our activities on something other than this free grace relationship that we have with God, and we're going to be climbing the ladders of life endlessly, frantically, hopelessly. This is crucial. We need hope fillers to stay hopeful. So if you translate this back to the passage that the visual that we put up earlier, here's what it looks like. We gather to worship to kind of have that public outpouring of hope. Like something to do stuff that you can kind of only do in public gatherings, to welcome people that might only engage in a public and more anonymous way. But then we craft environments and opportunities where people can learn how to fill each other up. That's our vision for spiritual growth at Surprise, creating specific kinds of environments so that we can go from rows to circles where one anothering happens. Does that make sense? We want to help people learn how to one another. We don't want to assume or try to convey that if you just come and listen to Pastor Matty, his sermons are so good that you're going to be so full that you'll have all that you need until the next time you listen to Pastor Matt speak or Pastor Ernie speak or listen to the band. Like that there's no human being that possesses the ability to fill another human being that full that they're not going to need any one anothering at all. That's just not how we're built, right? I mean, we're not built that way. God created us for community. And so God created the church to be able to provide that sort of encouragement and one anothering, what I like to call identity formation in community. So important. So I got a surprise for you guys. We're starting something that I am so stoked about. I'm so pumped about. I'm so jacked about. I'm going to have to change my shirt between services. I'm already sweating as I'm talking about it. It's called 1 month win groups. So this is for people who maybe aren't ready to commit to something super long-term. Like missional communities is more of a longer-term thing, months and months and stuff. Pre-missional communities is meant to kind of prepare people to be a part of missional communities, which we're going to talk about over the next 2 weeks. 1 month win groups are anybody who says, look, I've been going to this corporate worship thing. I've been sitting in rows, but I identify with what you're saying. I need some one anothering in my life. I just don't know what that needs to look like, and I don't have the bandwidth, the schedule, or the ability right now to say, I'll just jump into this thing. I just kind of need to learn how to do this one anothering thing from square one. And so if you need a win in your life, we're saying, we're looking for some people to experiment with us, to test drive this new model of community where we're going to take 1 month. We're going to band a few people together, 4 to 6 people probably, and we're going to give you some basic tools to learn the rhythms of what does it feel like to get together a couple times over a month to talk about an area of your life you need to win and just encourage each other. No, it's not the last thing you'll ever do to grow your faith, but it's a starting plate where we say, look, God wants us to go from rows to circles. It's the first kind of circle that many people will experience, and it'll give you the bandwidth to say, okay, what's next for me, Lord? Hopefully we'll get to the end of that month and you'll look back and say, you know what, I needed a win, but the win came in a way I didn't even expect. It came through friends that I didn't even have before. It came through, I've never prayed with a group of people before. I've never really set any sort of plan together with people that's purely because we believe in Jesus. Think about that for a minute. Have you ever scheduled something with someone simply because both of you believe in Jesus? Let's do this thing together as a group because of our faith. Most Christians have never ever done that. We've scheduled parties and birthdays and fun and trips and this, but most of the time when it comes to scheduling something and organizing our lives to be able to one another, most Christians, it's a brand new thing which is so exciting. So at Surprise, you can be in something like a 1-month win group to start community engagement. Or if you've never been to Starting Line, it's a fantastic way to go from rows to sit, as we will in 2 weeks from today, and talk about what's the surprise story? Where did this vision come from? What does it mean to be a community full of good older brothers who want to surprise lost sons? We'll tell the whole story. We'll ask questions. Last Starting Line a couple weeks ago, a couple gals sat next to each other, talked, and exchanged numbers at the end of the Starting Line. And I'm like, that's it. That's it. That's a win, church. Let's be friends. Like, what a win. Let's one another. Let's one another between Sundays. Just you call me if you need anything, or call me if you want to get coffee. I'm like, yes. Because if they're just going to come, not talk to each other, not exchange phone numbers, not go out and have a bad cup of coffee somewhere, and just hope that they can get all the filling they need, they're missing out. Oh, they're missing out on lots and lots of hope. Look at the end. Look at the end of this passage. I invite the band back up as I clarify this. This is so important. Don't neglect meeting together, as some are in the habit of doing. Lots of Christians are in the habit of losing their hope, of just trading the glory that comes in this free, undeserved relationship with a God who would rather die than be without us and claims us as his sons and daughters free of charge, sends us into a world in which we don't need to prove ourselves to be valuable and worthy, that we can engage in our lofty, high callings of life without trying to form our identity through our achievement. And we trade it away for the rat race. To look good enough, to be smart enough, to try to measure up. Every counselor I talk to says the same thing. All my clients, or almost all my clients, just don't feel good enough. And I'm like, your clients need the gospel. They need a God who says, I know you're not good enough. How about I just say good enough because I died for good enough, and that's good enough? Can we do that? People trade that away. They neglect meeting together, and they lose their hope, and they play the rat race instead. And Paul says, don't forget to do that. I want you to encourage each other. Don't neglect meeting together. And look at this last line here. All the more as you see the day approaching. What do you think that means? Now, if you were in some sort of one-anothering environment, a 1-month win, a missional community, a pre-missional community, you would answer that question. You'd think about that. In your bulletin, we have some questions we include about every sermon, and we want you guys to band together with people you're sitting next to, people in the car right on the way home, people in groups that you begin to join and form. What does it mean that the day is approaching? Evidently, we don't have much time. Now, I get this is written like 2,000 years ago. So you could say from the standpoint of chronology, we could have 2,000 more years. Who knows? I mean, if you're a climate enthusiast, or if you're really into the climate crisis, you believe we could only have a few years left. So whether you're coming from a theological standpoint or whether you're coming from a purely ecological standpoint, everybody probably has some sense of this thing may not last forever. Coming from a biblical standpoint, it's very, very healthy to understand. Number one, Jesus says he's coming back soon. We don't know what soon means, but we do know that he does not promise us a full life and then a full retirement. He doesn't promise us that. So that we can't just keep delaying and putting off this sort of important one anothering that we're talking about so that we can achieve things first. Because eventually it's going to be just too late to turn back. I'm going to be investing so much of my hope in this thing I'm trying to build that am I going to actually be able to turn away from it and grab onto the hope in Jesus? We don't have much time. You read the newspaper every day, you hear someone in their teens or 20s or 30s in a car accident or cancer or something tragic. Life is fragile. Families are fragile. Time flies. We moved here to Bismarck from Minnesota about 5 years ago. Has anybody else felt like the last 5 years just flew by? Like I have these pictures of my kids. I don't even recognize them from 5 years ago. I mean, they're chubby and bald, and they look like they're over the hill, and now they're lean and elementary-ish. Time flies. Jesus is coming. Life is fragile. God says, don't waste this time. You don't know how much you have. Don't just go to church and hope for enough hope. accept and open up that sensitive, vulnerable door that kind of guards our hearts from being known and really knowing others. Open that up and start experiencing the gift that I have for you to open when you are willing to be the body of Christ, the family of God. Will you stand and claim that call with me? Heavenly Father, too many of us have claimed an individualistic version of Christianity that has nothing to do with the family of God, and we repent of that this morning. We confess our sin of anonymity and individuality. Maybe it's our smartphones and social media that just lulls us into complacency, into thinking that I can just kind of be my own private Christian. We confess, Lord, to a loss of hope, to the adoption of worldly values, to the loss of the high status that we have in Jesus whenever we put our faith in something else. Forgive us for trading away the free grace we have in you for the rat race of life. And Lord, give us the stubborn courage to one another our way through life, in between Sundays. Sunday morning is just not enough. It never was meant to be. The early church got together every day because they didn't even have Bibles before they were written. They just had each other. And so, God, would you raise our confidence in what it means to have each other? Even despite all of our issues and flaws and quirks and inadequacies, despite all that, what a powerful thing it is to look across the aisle and see someone who loves you too. And show us how to fill each other up so that we can fill this world with the glory of God. In Jesus' name, all God's saints said. Let's sing together as we receive communion in this last song. You're welcome of any background to come forward if you'd like to claim Jesus' gift for you and the gift of his body and blood poured out for the healing of the world, forgiveness of every sin. We'll have communion, then we'll have people who'd love to pray for you over by the curtain, to my left, to your right. And anything going on in your life and the life of a beloved, we'd love to pray for you. So let's sing as this last song continues.